The coffee, that's what comes back first every time. Not the words, not the faces, just the coffee. That hotel coffee, sitting in the urn since maybe 4 in the morning, getting thicker by the hour. You know the smell. You've smelled it in 100 hotel ballrooms and conference rooms and back hallways where they run these things. It has that slightly burnt edge to it, like someone forgot to turn the warmer off and it's been cooking all day. I used to drink it. Back then, in that job, you drank whatever was in front of you because you never knew when you'd get your next chance to sit down. But that morning, standing where I was standing, I wasn't thinking about coffee. I wasn't thinking about anything yet. I was just holding the tray and watching the door. And I'm glad you asked me to tell you this, because I've never told anyone the whole thing, not all of it. Not the parts that kept me up at night for the first few months. Not the part that still wakes me up sometimes, even now, even all these years later. I always figured it would come out someday. I just didn't know who I'd be when it did. You want to know what I remember most about that room? The chair on the left side. Not the one behind the table, the other one, the one they brought in from somewhere else because the original one didn't match. Someone had to run down and find it, and I remember watching them carry it in, this heavy leather thing that didn't match anything else in the room. And nobody said anything about it. Nobody cared. It was just a chair. But I noticed because I was noticing everything that morning. I was new enough to still be noticing things. I hadn't gotten to the point yet where you stop seeing the room and start just seeing your job. The room was already full when I got there. Not the public part, this was the staging area if you can call it that. Just a back room off the main hall, with the table and the chairs and the water bottles I was supposed to be putting out. Someone had stacked folders on one end of the table, neat piles of them, and there were little flags on sticks, the red and blue ones they used to mark positions for the cameras. I didn't know what those flags meant yet. I just knew I wasn't supposed to move them. The table was longer than I expected. I'd seen tables like this on television shows and in movies, but you don't really understand scale until you're standing next to one. This one had a dark wood top, maybe oak or walnut, and it was polished enough that I could see a blurry reflection of the ceiling lights in it. There were 4 microphones on thin stands, 2 on each side, positioned so the cameras could get clean shots of the speakers without the mics getting in the way. The mics were black and had that foam cover over them, the kind that makes voices sound a little flat when you hear them through the monitors. I set the water bottles down, 4 of them evenly spaced. They were the small bottles, the ones with the twist caps, not the big dispensers you see at some events. I made sure the labels were facing outward so the talent wouldn't have to turn them around. It was a small thing. It didn't matter. But I was new and small things were what I had. And then I heard someone say my name, not my real name, the name they used for me in that job, the short version, and they said, "Don't leave the room once it starts. Stay by the wall and don't say anything unless someone asks you directly." And I said okay, and that was the last thing anyone said to me about it until later. I'm realizing I still haven't told you what I was doing there, what my job actually was. You can probably guess from the title, but let me get there the right way. I was 23, I was working for the network as a production assistant, which meant I did whatever they told me to do that day. Sometimes I carried cables. Sometimes I watched the monitor in the control room and called out if someone's mic was going red. Sometimes I did what I did that morning, which was walk around with a tray of water bottles and put them on tables before the talent came in. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't important, I knew that. Everyone there knew more than I did. I was just the kid with the tray. But that morning was different. I don't know why I remember that morning more clearly than I remember most mornings from that whole year of my life. Maybe because something happened that I didn't expect, and our brains lock onto the things we don't expect. Or maybe because I've replayed it so many times in my head that it's taken on more weight than it actually had. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend I know. What I know is what I saw. The first thing that happened was they brought in the folders. I don't mean the ones already on the table. These were different, a stack of them carried by someone I didn't recognize. Someone I would later wish I'd paid more attention to. At the time, I thought they were just more copies of whatever was on the agenda. I didn't think about them again until much later that night when I was lying in my apartment trying to fall asleep, and I suddenly sat up and thought, wait. Why were there 2 different sets of folders? Who brought those in? And then I couldn't sleep for another 2 hours. But that was later. In the moment, I just watched them put the folders on the table, and I went back to checking the water bottles. The producer came through one more time before everything started. She had a headset on and she was talking fast into it, and she stopped right next to me and said, "You hear anything weird from the sound check, you tell Marcus immediately." Don't wait, don't try to fix it yourself. And I said okay. And she moved on. And I remember thinking, what does weird sound like? What am I supposed to be listening for? I would find out later why that mattered. Not the way you're probably thinking, not the big moment, something smaller, something that only mattered to me. The lights were hot, I remember that too. They had the overhead lights on, the ones they use for the cameras, and the heat from them was making the room feel stuffy even though it was air-conditioned. I could feel a little line of sweat forming at the back of my neck, right at my hairline, and I kept hoping nobody would notice. I was supposed to be invisible. Sweat doesn't look invisible. There was a small table near the door where someone had put a pitcher of water and some paper cups. The pitcher was glass, and there was a lemon slice floating in it, and I remember thinking that whoever arranged that table had spent more time on it than they needed to. Nobody was going to drink from that pitcher. Everyone who mattered had their own water bottle on the main table. But there it was, the pitcher with the lemon, and I thought about how even the things nobody sees still get arranged by someone. And then the room started to fill. The Secret Service detail came first, 2 of them just walking through like they owned the place. They took positions near the door and near the window, and they didn't look at anyone. They just looked at the room itself, the way you're supposed to look at a room when you're checking it. I watched them do it because I didn't know what else to do. I was supposed to be invisible by then, just standing against the wall with my empty tray, and I was trying very hard to be invisible. The first one was tall, really tall, and he had this stillness to him that made me think of statues. He stood near the window and he looked out of it, and then he looked back into the room, and then he did it again. Looking out, looking in, like he was waiting for something to happen outside that would tell him what to do inside. The second one was shorter, more compact, and he moved differently, more restless, more alert. He kept checking his watch. He kept looking at the door. And then the staff started filtering in. Advisors, assistants, a few people I recognized from the coverage but couldn't name. They moved to the sides of the room behind the chairs. The energy was strange, not nervous exactly, but focused. Everyone was focused. I could feel it in the way they moved, the way they talked in low voices, the way nobody's eyes wandered. When you're 23 and you don't know anything, you learn to read rooms by watching how other people act in them. And this room was acting like something important was about to happen. I think I knew that already, but I didn't know what. There was a woman near the back wall who kept checking her phone, and then putting it away and then checking it again. She was wearing a dark suit, and she had a folder pressed against her chest like she was holding onto it. I didn't know who she was. She might have been a lawyer or an aide or something else entirely. But she was the only person in the room who looked like she might be scared, and I couldn't stop watching her. The chair scraped, just once, and I remember thinking, I don't know why this stuck with me, the sound of that chair scraping. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even loud. It was just a chair being pulled out and someone sitting down in it. But there was something about the way it sounded that made me look up. And when I looked up, he was there. I want to be careful about how I describe this part, because I know what you think you know about him. Everyone does. You have a whole picture in your head already, built from years of watching him on screens, reading what people say about him, having arguments about him at dinners and on social media. I had that picture too before that morning. It was already forming. But what I'm telling you is what I saw with my own eyes, standing where I was standing, holding my tray, being 23 and scared and trying not to show it. He walked in like he owned the building. That's the first thing, not arrogantly, that's not the word. He walked in like he had been there before, like he knew exactly where he was going, like the room had been built for him even though it hadn't. His tie was red, I remember that. It wasn't the red of an American flag or a Republican Party logo, just a plain red tie, solid, the kind you see in a department store. And on a day like that, in a room like that, wearing something that plain felt like a choice. I don't know what the choice meant, I just remember noticing it. His hand, that was the first thing I noticed about him as a person, not a figure. His hand came up and brushed the edge of the table as he walked past it. Just a light touch, almost unconscious, the way you touch a railing going downstairs. But he did it again a few seconds later, passing the same spot, and I remember thinking, is that a tick? Is he doing it on purpose? I had never been close enough to him before to notice things like that. On television, he's all face and voice and energy. But this close, he's a person with hands and movements and small habits you can see. He sat down in the chair that didn't match, the heavy leather one, and he didn't look at anyone. He looked at the table, at the folders, at the water bottle in front of him. He picked it up, turned it in his hand, set it back down, and then he looked up. And the room changed, I don't know how else to say it. The room changed because he looked up, and when he looked up he was looking for someone scanning the room for someone specific, and he found them. He found them and something passed between them just for a second, something I couldn't read. And then he looked away and the room went back to what it had been. That's when the second person came in. You already know who it was. You've seen the footage, you've read the articles. You have your own opinion about him, your own feelings, your own way of understanding what happened in that room and everything that came after. I know that. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to tell you what I saw. He came in differently. That was the first thing. He didn't walk in with the room already following him. He walked in like the room didn't matter, like he was alone even when he wasn't. And he stopped at the threshold and he looked at the table, at the chairs, at the flags the cameras used to mark positions. He looked at all of it for a long moment, longer than you might expect, like he was taking inventory. And then he sat down. And he was still. That's what I keep coming back to, he was still. His hands were still on the table, not touching anything, just resting there. His face was calm. Not confident, I want to be precise about this, not confident the way the other one was confident. Calm in a different way, a way that didn't need to show itself. I didn't understand it at the time. I was 23. I thought calm was just the absence of energy, the opposite of loud. I didn't know that calm could be a choice. I didn't know it could be a weapon. The cameras started, and I expected something to happen, some explosion of words or energy, some moment where the room itself would crack open, but nothing happened. They talked, they argued a little. They went through what they were supposed to go through, and I stood against the wall and watched and tried not to breathe too loudly. And I noticed the hand. I noticed it because it was the only movement in the room. While everyone else was still, his hand kept moving. Not big movements, small ones. He would brush the edge of the table, the same edge he'd touched walking in. Brush, 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 like a metronome, like something he wasn't doing on purpose. And I remember thinking, is that nervousness? Is he nervous? But he didn't look nervous. His face was still calm, still watching, still still. It was only the hand that moved. And then the hand stopped. I don't know what caused it to stop. Something changed in the room, some shift in the air or the words or the energy, and the hand just stopped. He caught himself, I saw it. The hand was mid-brush and it just stopped, and then his fingers curled and his hand went flat on the table and stayed there. And he didn't look down at his hand, he didn't acknowledge it. He just went on looking at whoever was talking. I didn't know what it meant. I'm still not sure I know what it meant. But I remember thinking in that moment that something had shifted, that the room had gone somewhere he didn't expect it to go. There was a second tell, I'm getting to it, but I need to tell you about the break first because that's where everything changed. That's the part that matters most. The break came, that's the part everyone talks about. The cameras cut, the lights went down a little, and the room broke apart the way rooms do when they're between segments. People talking to each other, checking things, stretching. I moved toward the table to refill the water bottles if anyone needed it. I was doing my job. And that's when it happened. I can tell you exactly what was said. I was too close and not close enough at the same time. I was standing right there, but there was noise in the room, people talking, the hum of the equipment, and they were speaking quietly. Not whispering, they weren't hiding it exactly, but not talking for an audience. Talking to each other. Two people in a room saying things to each other. 6 words, I know there were 6 words. I counted them later in my head over and over. Not because I was trying to memorize them, I didn't know they mattered yet, but because something about the way he said them made me stop and pay attention. The rhythm of it, the way it landed. 6 words and then a pause and then something in his face that I couldn't name. And the other one stood there. And I saw his throat move, not a swallow, not a gulp, just a movement, a tiny thing like he was processing something that had just been said to him. And then he reached for the water bottle in front of him and he picked it up and he took a sip, and I remember thinking he took that sip too late. It came 1 beat too late, like he was covering something. Like he needed something to do with his mouth while he figured out what to say next. I would find out later what those 6 words were. I would find out that no one else had heard them, or if they had, they hadn't caught them, or if they had caught them, they hadn't understood what they meant. But I heard them. I was standing right there. I just didn't know in that moment that I was supposed to remember them. After the break, everything was different. I don't mean the cameras were back on. I mean the energy in the room had changed. I could feel it. The staff along the walls were quieter. The advisors were leaning in a little more. And his hand, the hand that had been brushing the edge of the table, his hand was now pressed flat against it, fingers spread, not moving. The cameras rolled. The conversation continued, but something had shifted. He was still confident, still talking, still doing all the things he had done before the break. But there was a new watchfulness in the way he did them, like he was performing a version of himself, and the performance was slightly different now, slightly more careful. And then the smile came. It was after something the other one said, something I don't remember now, something about the topic they were discussing, some point in the argument. And he laughed. Not a big laugh, just a small one, the kind you make when you want someone to know you think they're wrong but you're not going to make a thing about it. And the smile came with the laugh. But the smile came late. 2 seconds, maybe less. The laugh happened and then a beat later the smile came, like he was reminding himself to do it. And I remember watching it happen and thinking, that's not real. That smile isn't real. It's a reaction to a reaction, it's a cover. I don't know why I noticed these things. I was 23, I didn't know anything about reading people. I was just standing there holding my tray, watching. But something in me was paying attention to the parts that didn't match. The parts that cameras miss. There was a moment, about 2/3 of the way through the second segment, when I thought he was going to leave. I don't know what triggered it. Something that was said, maybe, or something that wasn't said. His body changed. He leaned back in the chair, the heavy leather one, the one that didn't match, and he put his hands on the armrests and he started to push. You could see it. He was lifting himself out of the chair, and then he stopped. He stopped and he stayed there half-raised for a long moment. And his eyes went to someone in the corner of the room, someone I didn't recognize, someone I would think about for days afterward without knowing why. And something passed between them, a look, a nod almost imperceptible, and he sat back down. And I thought he almost walked out. He almost walked out and someone stopped him. I didn't know who that someone was, I didn't know what the look meant, but I knew that it mattered. I knew that the moment he almost left and didn't leave was a moment when something was decided. I would find out later what that look meant. Not everything, I don't think anyone knows everything about what happened in that room, but enough. Enough to understand why he stopped. And then it was over. The cameras stopped. The lights went down. People stood up and started moving and the room broke apart again, the way rooms do when something has ended. And I watched him stand up, the first one, the one who came in like he owned the place, and I watched him turn to the other one. And they shook hands. And I was close enough to see it happen, close enough to hear it if not clearly. Close enough to see the way his face looked in the moment before the handshake ended, the way his eyes went somewhere that came. Raz couldn't follow. And then they separated, and the room filled with people, and I lost sight of both of them. But I had seen it. I had seen what happened in the handshake. I had seen the sentence, just a few words that one of them said to the other, leaning in close enough that only I was near enough to maybe hear it. And I knew in that moment in the parking lot afterward, walking to my car, that one of them had won something. Not the argument, not the segment, something else. Something that didn't show up in the footage. Something that only existed in that handshake, in that sentence, in the look that passed between them. I couldn't have told you what it was, I still can't, not exactly. But I knew it was real. I knew it mattered. And I knew that I had been the only person in the room, maybe the only person in the world, who saw it. I drove home that night on the same highway I drove every day. Same music, same stops, same everything, and I kept thinking about the room. The water bottles I had put out, the chair that didn't match, the hand on the edge of the table, the almost walkout, the handshake, the sentence I almost heard. And I kept thinking about what the producer had said to me that morning. You hear anything weird from the sound check, you tell Marcus immediately. And I thought, what was that about? What was she expecting to hear? And then I thought maybe she wasn't expecting anything. Maybe she just wanted someone to be paying attention. Maybe she wanted someone to see. I thought about the woman with the folder near the back wall, the one who looked scared. I tried to remember her face, but it had already started to fade. I only knew she'd been there because I was looking for things that didn't fit. I was looking for the edges. I was looking for the places where the story didn't line up. And I thought about the folders, the 2 sets of folders, the ones that were on the table when I arrived and the ones that someone I didn't recognize brought in later. Why were there 2 sets? Who needed 2 sets? And what was written on the second set that I couldn't read from where I was standing? I didn't have answers. I still don't have all of them. But I knew that night, driving home on the same highway I drove every day, that I had seen something that mattered, and I didn't know what to do with that. I want to tell you something else now. Something I've been holding back, even from myself, maybe especially from myself. The week after it happened, I almost quit. I drove to work one morning and I sat in the parking lot for 30 minutes, just sitting there with the engine running, and I thought about walking in and telling them I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't know what it was. I just knew I didn't want to be in rooms anymore. I didn't want to put water bottles on tables and stand against walls and watch things I couldn't understand or explain. But I didn't quit. I don't know why. Maybe I was scared of what I'd do if I had nothing to do. Maybe I was scared of what it would mean if I walked away from this one thing I was actually good at, which was noticing things. Maybe I just wasn't brave enough to leave. I went in that morning, I put water bottles on tables, I stood against walls, I watched. I kept watching for another 2 years. And then I left the job. Not because of this, I want to be clear about that. I left because of a lot of things, a bunch of small things that added up over time until one day I realized I didn't want to be in that world anymore. But I think this was the first thing that made me wonder if I was in the right place. I never talked about it, not to friends, not to family, not to the therapist I started seeing a year later. I told the therapist about work stress. I told her about long hours and difficult people and the pressure of being young in a world that expected me to be older. I never told her about this. I never told her about the handshake, the 6 words, the look. I don't know why I kept it secret. Maybe because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Maybe because I didn't believe myself. Maybe because I wasn't sure yet what it meant, and if I said it out loud, I'd have to figure it out and I wasn't ready. I think mostly I kept it because I knew even then that it was the only thing I had. The only thing that was mine. If I gave it away, if I told people, it would stop being mine and start being theirs. Their story, their take, their thing to argue about on the internet. I didn't want that, I wanted to keep it. So I kept it, for years I kept it, and now finally I'm telling you. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you what the 6 words were. I know, I can feel you waiting for it. You're waiting for me to say the words, to let you in on the secret, to give you something nobody else has. But I can't do that, not because I don't want to, but because I don't think it matters the way you think T matters. The words were just words, 6 of them, they could have been anything. What made them matter was what happened in the room when they were said, the silence that followed, the way the other one stood there, the sip of water that came 1 beat too late. Words are just sounds. It's what happens after the sounds that matters. It's the space between the words and the next thing, the space where meaning lives. I could tell you the words and it wouldn't help you understand what I saw. It would just be 6 more sounds. You could argue about them, analyze them, write articles about what they meant or didn't mean. But you wouldn't have been there. You wouldn't have felt the room change. You wouldn't have seen the hand stop mid-brush. I'm not going to tell you the words, I'm going to tell you what I saw instead. That's the only thing I have to give you, the seeing, the noticing. I want to go back to something I said earlier. The producer told me to listen for anything weird from the sound check, and I didn't understand what she meant at the time. But now I think I do. There was a moment, right before the cameras rolled for the first time, when the sound engineer, a guy named Marcus, the same Marcus she told me to report to, he was checking the levels, and he said something into his headset that I couldn't hear. But I saw his face change, just for a second, like he heard something he didn't expect. And then he shook his head and he made an adjustment and he kept going. And nobody else noticed. Nobody else was looking at him. But I was looking at him because I was supposed to be looking for things that were weird, and his face was weird for just a second. I don't know what he heard, I don't know what he adjusted. But I think, and I've thought about this a lot, I think the mics caught something they weren't supposed to catch. In that moment before the cameras rolled, there was a sound or a word or a noise, and Marcus heard it and he made it go away. And I think maybe that's why I was supposed to be paying attention. Not to the debate, not to the confrontation, to the sounds that weren't supposed to be there. I could be wrong, I've been wrong about things before, but that's what I think. Let me tell you about the handshake again. Not what it looked like, I already did that, but what it felt like to watch it. When they stood up and turned toward each other, the room got quiet. Not silent, there were still people talking at the edges, still the hum of the equipment, but quieter, like the air had thickened, like the room itself was holding its breath. He extended his hand first. The first one, the one with the red tie, and the other one took it, and they shook. And in that shake something happened that I can't describe except to say that it was the real conversation. The one that wasn't on the cameras, the one that nobody was supposed to see. I was close enough to hear the sound of their hands meeting, that soft clap of palm against palm, And then a pause and then words, not many, just a few, spoken low, meant for each other and no one else. I heard them, not all of them, not clearly, but I heard enough. And what I heard told me everything I needed to know about who had won and who had lost, and what the winning and losing actually meant. He smiled as he said it. The winner, the one who came in calm and stayed calm. He smiled and he let go of the handshake and he stepped back and he looked at the other one and he smiled, and I knew in that moment that the other one understood exactly what the smile meant. And then it was over, they stepped apart. Staff moved in, people started talking, the moment was gone. But I was still standing there, holding my empty tray, and I was thinking, I saw it. I was there and I saw it, and now I know something that almost no one else knows. And I didn't know what to do with that. I'm going to tell you one more thing I've never said out loud. I kept something from that day, not a folder, I never touched those, not a water bottle or a mic stand or any of the physical things. I kept a feeling. I kept the feeling of standing in that room, watching those two men, knowing that something was happening that mattered more than anything I'd ever seen before. I kept it like a secret, like a treasure, like something I could take out and look at when I needed to remember that I had once been in a room where history was being made, and I had seen it, and I had understood it, even if I couldn't explain it. That's what I kept, that's what I still have. And I'm giving it to you now because you've asked me to, and because I think maybe it's time to let it go. Time to stop being the only person who knows. Time to tell the story to someone who will actually listen. So here it is, all of it, everything I remember, everything I've held on to. I was the kid with the water tray. I was 23 years old. I was standing against a wall in a hotel ballroom, and I saw something I'll never forget. And now you know too. I want to tell you one more thing before I end this, one more thing I've never said out loud to anyone. I knew, in the room in that moment, I knew something important was happening. I knew it the way you know a storm is coming before you see the lightning, before you hear the thunder. Just a feeling, a pressure in the air. A sense that something had shifted and was going to keep shifting, and that I was watching it happen from a place where most people couldn't watch. And I didn't say anything. Not then, not after. I went home, I drove on the highway, I listened to music. I went to bed. I went to work the next day and did my job, and nobody asked me what I had seen because nobody knew what I had seen. I was just the kid with the tray. I was just the 23-year-old production assistant who was too junior to matter. But I knew and I said nothing. That's the part I carry, not the 6 words, not the handshake, not any of it. The part I carry is the knowing and the silence. The fact that I was there, I saw it, I understood that it mattered, and I kept driving home like nothing had happened. I think about it sometimes. I think about what would have happened if I had said something. Not to the press, I was too junior for that, too unknown, nobody would have listened. But to someone, anyone, if I had written it down that night instead of just driving home. If I had kept the folder I almost picked up by mistake, the one with the writing on it that I couldn't read from where I was standing. If I had told someone what I saw. I didn't, I drove home, I listened to music, I went to bed. And I still can't watch the footage when it replays. Not because of what I see on the screen, I know what you see on the screen, I've watched it 100 times, it's right there for anyone who wants to look. But because I know what you don't see. And every time I watch it I think about the room, the coffee smell. The chair that didn't match, the hand on the table, the smile that came late. And I think about the silence. I'm glad you asked me to tell you this. I'm glad someone finally asked.